Hey guys, this is Jakob. I'm content manager and I'm helping small and medium enterprises with their content strategy. In my podcast, Content Marketing Mastery, I'm interviewing people who create great content. And today I have a special guest. His name is Pablo Gonzalez. Pablo is the inventor of the Relationship Flywheel, and he's co-founder of Be the Stage and host of two cool podcasts. One, the Chief Executive Connector, and the second one is Not Your Average Investor podcast. Welcome, Pablo. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome, man. I'm super happy to be here, Jakob. Like I been looking forward to this since we spoke. I think it was like right before Christmas we spoke, man. And I know
Yes.
you're coming on my podcast. I'm ready to talk content, dude. I love content.
Yes, that was one of the first things that I recognized that we that we're very similar. We just like to produce content and just yeah, that's our thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. And just, like I think a lot of people produce content. There's very few people that I talk to that really just understand it on a very human level like you do.
Hmm.
Right? Like to me, content is I talk to a lot of marketers a lot, and
Yeah.
marketers approach it like a marketer.
Hmm.
Um, Approaching it as a human being, building relationships, to me is the
Hmm.
key to all of it.
Yes.
And that's why we connected on that instantly, man. So I'm really really pumped to get into it.
Yeah, that's already the topic. So you have a so one thing that I want to add. We have this content lifestyle. This is something that I always stress. It's not like I'm on camera, I'm a other human being. No, in front of the camera, I try to be 100% me. And
Yeah.
when I'm going to the gym, I'm 100% me. And most people act differently on camera. And but this is something that you have to train. You have to stay in front of the camera. This is something that I want to add. But this is uh, already our topic, how to build relationships. This is something that you are very good in. But before we
Hold on,
uh,
hold on, hold on. Let's stay in content lifestyle, bro. Like you can't just drop content lifestyle on me and walk away. Uh, I love it. I've actually never heard anybody say it that way.
yeah,
But when you say content lifestyle, I think it's the idea that I'll be having a conversation with my wife over dinner and she's just
yeah,
telling me about a pain point that she has that nobody understands. So I'm like, this is content, right? Like it's the idea that you can source content out of anything
yes,
because there is always every little lesson that you learn, every little thing that you kind of like see from a different angle. The moment you change a little bit of perspective, that's a content moment.
hmm,
And very few people think like that, right? Like
hmm,
the always just be thinking this could be content. This could be a piece of advice I give someone. This could be some time I save somebody and trying to learn something that I just figured out by happenstance. Why not make content out of it? Why not share it? Why not add to the world
yes.
instead of trying to like be somebody on a screen because it feeds your own ego. Feed the people around you, right?
Hmm. Hmm. So what is the reason that so we are doing it instantly, automatically, it's in our DNA, but there are people out there who don't do it. And this is also something that fascinates me. Okay, there are several reasons why they don't do it because they fear criticism, or what do you think?
Yeah.
Criticism is one big topic.
Yeah, man. I think it's generally a mirror issue, right? Like it's generally a number one, imposter syndrome is very real,
Hmm.
right? The people always undervalue the stuff that they know, right? Like
Yes.
I remember when I was a green building expert in Miami and in California, even, let's go back to the beginning of my green building expertise when I was learning it all in California. You hear the same things over and over
Yeah.
in what you're learning in your profession and the people that you work with that are experts in that. So you get so used to hearing those messages that you're like, everybody knows this. And what I realized is that that's not the case. you know Even
Yes.
every room that I walked into, I almost had to start back from zero and felt like I was speaking to I had to unlearn what I knew in order to explain it to people to a certain
Yes.
extent, right?
Yes.
So I think that happens at scale, right? Just because you probably the stuff that you know about content or marketing or taekwondo, you're so like exposed to it all the time that you don't think it's special. But at
Mm.
the end of the day, we've all lived inherently a different life, right? Like everybody's walked a different path to get to here. You're in front of I mean, yes, you're in Hamburg and I'm in Jacksonville. So obviously we're in a different life. But if we met at a coffee shop, right, we took a different path to get there. And even if we woke up sleeping in the same room for the last 25 years, no matter what, before that, we took a different path to get to that. So everything is informed by our unique life experiences. And you have to keep appreciating that idea. You have to appreciate that in other people, and you have to appreciate that in yourself. And it's often hardest to appreciate it in yourself because you're
Mhm.
so used to it. So I think that's the
Yes.
number one thing. It's that imposter syndrome of like, why am I going to, one of my main speaking points that first took off is the idea that, because I used to speak about networking, right? Like I'm a relationship builder. So
Yes.
one of the most valuable things that people tell me is, man, when you tell me that when I'm at a line walking into a networking event or a conference, that I should turn around and say hi to somebody and that will create an extra relationship. That was genius. And I'm like, are you kidding me, bro? like that's so natural to me. I can't be next to someone without saying hi. But the
Yeah.
moment you name it, right? Like the moment you give it power, then people start noticing it, right? So there really is no fact too small. And I think people have this imposter syndrome of putting out some of the most basic things that they figured out 15 years ago because they just assume everybody knows it. But
Yeah.
the way that content works, since it lives forever and you don't have to spend time reiterating it and anybody can see it, it's completely frictionless. So you might as well just put it out. And
Mhm.
anybody that sees it that already knew it's like, oh yeah, I agree. And anybody that sees it and hasn't known it's like, oh my God, this guy's a genius, you know?
Yeah.
So I
Exactly.
think that's the biggest thing, man. I think people are too hard on themselves and they don't appreciate
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. So, can we just go one step back and
I'm sorry.
okay, yeah, no sorries, everything perfect, everything
Okay.
fine. Enjoy the conversation. Just to for the listeners. So, can you shortly, in a nutshell, introduce yourself? So, who are you? And this, and when we first talked, you told me also the story how why community building is so important for you, and this is also very important, I think. Can you just in just few sentences introduce yourself? And yeah.
As you've already learned, I don't know how to stop talking when I start talking. So just let me know, man. I'm going to try to keep this under 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Um,
I will give you a sign, something like this.
that's cool.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Yeah.
that, man.
And yeah.
Jacob, like I told you, man, I was born in Venezuela. I'm the most American person in my family. I moved to the US when I was 2. I went into preschool being the only kid that didn't speak English. So that kind of marked me as being an outsider. Learned English real quick. A year later, moved to Spain, enrolled in a British academy, thinking that I knew Spanish and English, and got there and I realized I didn't understand the Spanish dialect or the British dialect, and
Hmm.
went home crying again. And ever since then, I've just always been obsessed with making relationships with people. And as a young kid, I became the funny guy, right? Like I got into the Ace Ventura thing and like being really animated, and that worked for a long time. And then my early 30s, as I started getting higher up in the world of professionals and networking, because I got involved in nonprofits, I got on the board of a couple of charities, and all of a sudden, I'm surrounded by some of the biggest decision makers in my city. By the way, that is a shortcut to influence. Get involved with nonprofits. Once you get
Hmm.
on the board, you realize that the most influential people in your city are a part of them. And all of a sudden, I'm in this room and I realized I didn't have anything to talk to them about. And I had to re engineer the idea that, like, being the funny guy has a shelf life. And the way that these people have created their networks by being on charities and whatnot is because they're adding value to people around them. So
Hmm.
I started really just like, okay, so adding value is the move. How do I do that? Well, I guess instead of talking about me, I got to talk about them. I got to ask them questions and listen and see if there's any kind of perspective I can give them or
Yeah.
someone I can introduce them to. So I started down that path and I got kind of obsessed with that. And then when I was 33, my brother got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He fought it for 2 years and passed away. My older brother, who was 8.5 years older than me. And at his funeral, 1,200 people showed up to the church. And one thing hit me immediately, and another thing started landing on me. And the first thing that hit me is these 1,200 people, this like community of the Catholic parish that I was a part of, have made the hardest thing that I've ever gone through easier to go through. right? Like the fact that we had so much help when he got sick, of referrals to doctors, and his wife working. And when he passed, my dad's friends put together a fund, just 1,200 people showing up and that support and filling you up, man. I just thought, man, if this can be valuable to me right now, it's the most valuable thing ever,
Mm.
right? Community. And then I was like, wait a minute, the church's business model is community. Right? Like that's a business model. And then once I started seeing it as a business model, I started the reticular activator hit, and I started seeing it everywhere. I started realizing that somebody that buys a Harley Davidson all of a sudden can't go buy a Japanese bike 2 years later because they lose all their friends, right? So I started seeing how businesses implement community. And so I started getting obsessed with this idea of how do you turn community as the machine that builds your business. And then the other thing that happened was, as people started reaching out to me about my brother, one person after another would tell me, your brother, I'd walk into a room. If your brother was in the room, I knew it was a good room. He was always bringing people together.
Well,
He was always making sure everybody was comfortable. And I don't know if you have older brothers, man, but there's this like weird dynamic having a brother that's that much older than you. I always called him like my example and my North Star, because I would always look at him and be like, well, if Bert did this and that didn't go well, then I don't want to do it. But I never ever thought, well, Bert did this and that's good, and I do want to do that, right?
yeah.
So all of a sudden, I'm like getting all this feedback from people that they see my brother the way that I've always wanted to be seen, and I never saw that in him, right? And the idea that somebody who's the best man at my wedding, and I was the best man at his wedding, very very close, that I could miss this extraordinary value he had to everybody around him. I started thinking, who else am I missing their value, right? Like, what other person have I not forgiven, or do I judge before I extract that value from them that can add to my life and I can add to other people's lives? So I just became obsessed with this concept. I became obsessed with the concept that everybody has value, and that if I can get really good at understanding someone's value and sharing it with other people, I could be creating community. And then this aha moment happens. At the time, I moved back from California. I had started this green building consulting company, got acquired by my biggest client, and I went in house as director of sustainability for a big hospital builder and university builder and big public project builder. And at first I loved it, right? I was making 100 grand doing something cool. Director of sustainability sounds awesome. But really they just hired me to like solve this problem and get out of the way. And once I solved the problem, I was working not very hard. I was working like 15 hours a week. And the rest of the time I was like doing my nonprofit stuff, and I was becoming marginalized in my company while my star grew outside because of the nonprofit stuff, right? Like while I started feeling useless in my company, I got named to a top 20 under 40 in Miami, right? So, but then something happened. My CEO got invited to speak on a panel about smart cities in front of the Economic Development Agency of Miami.
Mhm.
At the last minute, he decides he doesn't want to go, and they send me in his stead. And when I show up, I didn't know this, but I shared the stage with the head of Latin America for Cisco Systems and the head of the Smart Cities Initiative for the World Bank. Right?
No,
And me,
no pressure.
yeah, no, I didn't even know. I didn't know who I was stepping on stage with, right? So like, so I get there, and then me, who's in a dead end in his career and feeling useless, right? But I get on, I just speak my truth, right? I know what I'm talking about when it came to that. It's my expertise. And when I came
Mhm.
off that stage for the first time ever, there was a line 6 people deep waiting to talk to me like I'm a celebrity waiting to sign autographs. And as I'm talking to these people, I'm like, everybody here thinks I'm much more important than I am. Right? And at that point, I'm like, I know what's happening here. Because as somebody who's always been fanatical about human connection, I read psychology books and brain books and whatever. The brain justifies what it sees.
Yes.
So if you're in the audience and someone's on stage, the brain is telling you this person must have added value that I don't have. They've got something special here, and that's why they're there and I'm here, right? Same reason people tell you don't believe everything you see on TV, because your brain is doing that at all times, right? So, and then on top of that, I'm like, on top of that, because I shared the stage with people of a certain ilk, I got this like guilty by association buoyancy of this like expertise value. And at that moment, I thought to myself, how can I use this trick to serve other people?
Yeah.
Right. Like, because at this time, I'm like, I know value. I know giving people value is the move. So instead of thinking, how can I get on more stages? I thought, how can I provide stages for others to get what I want. And what I wanted was to become more important in my company. So I reached out to this developer that was building this high rise on top of a metro rail station in front of the University of Miami, in like a rich neighborhood of Miami called Coral Gables. And the residents didn't want it there because they don't want high rises in their backyard. But because he was building it on top of the metro rail station, I knew he was incentivizing public transportation. It's called trans-oriented development, and that's important for Miami. So I reached out to him. I'm like, listen, man, I've been working with charities for the last 15 years. I've got these like 3 different young professional groups that I'm a leader of. I want to have an event about the importance of public transportation in Miami. I want to talk about your project and how that fits in. I'm going to bring a politician on the board of one of my charities that cares about public transportation, and a land use attorney that I started one of these groups with. We're going to talk about transit-oriented development. This developer with this hotly contested project that wouldn't have taken my call if I'm saying, hey, I want to give you a bid, is like, sure, I'm in. When? Right? So shows up, do this little event, 20 young professionals come, doesn't give him any business, but I gave him a stage.
Yeah,
and
but
a week.
that's the important thing. You gave him a stage where he can present himself. That's the key.
Correct. I gave him the stage where I can showcase his value and connect him to other people on the stage, right? A week later, he's in the office like, you guys going to bid on this project, right? Like something we had no shot at. We're like backdooring a $60 million project. And that completely changed my trajectory professionally. And as I got more and more obsessed with that stuff, all of a sudden Gary Vee shows up in my life. And I start thinking, dude, that's what this guy's doing, right? Like this guy's using every single social media channel as a stage. And he very tactically is doing keynote speeches and Q&A. So that way, in his keynote speech, he shares the stage with people. And in his social media channels, he is showing people on it. So making those things stages. And that's why people are showing up to all his events. And that's why, so I've done this a bunch of times now, right? Like I've made it onto Gary Vee's social media at this point 3 times. And that, so I started thinking, there's stages everywhere. I don't have to work for 10 years in a charity to then have a stage. I can start a content stream. I can start a Facebook group. I can start a YouTube channel. I can start a podcast. And since then, I've just been iterating through, man, using that exact concept of being the stage, using my social media as a leverage point for everybody interesting that I meet. I make content around my relationship building, and then whatever makes you look special, sound special, I post it, making it about you. And that way people that know me get to know you if they want. And people that know you are like, my friend's on TV. Oh, and who's this guy that put him on? Right. So it becomes this relationship flywheel that keeps feeding itself. And I've created a business around that, man.
Yeah. This is you also have an own concept, right? So how you're building this stage for other businesses. So you also started this another podcast with one of your clients. Can we speak a little bit about that one? So how was that? Where was the baseline? So how did this thing started?
Yeah, man. So I skipped a couple steps there, right? After my construction thing, I got the opportunity to go be VP of business development for this like startup software, where I started really refining the strategy and making it more content driven. After a year, I decided to leave that partnership. And, I just kind of like, I was out on a limb. I figured I'd snap it off. And I was just going to kind of figure out all these lessons I had learned and try to figure something out. And I took this like 90-day purposeful pause to, get some distance, right? And like distill these lessons and figure out where I want to be in 10 years instead of taking my next opportunity. And in that, I knew I was going to be really angsty. So I booked these 4 conferences, and they're all kind of like content, digital marketing related. Gary Vee's was the first one. The second one was this guy, Ryan Moran's Capitalism Conference, which was all about creating e-commerce businesses, selling e-commerce businesses, and acquiring and investing in e-commerce businesses. And somebody on that stage said, if you're going to build a business around anything other than the thing that you love most, you doing that you are really, really good at, you doing that as the main driver of the business, if you're going to do anything else, go get a job, right? Not worth it. So, I remained true to that concept, and I iterated through, right? So after these 4 conferences, I came home with a contact list of 450 people, right? Like that I made legit relationships with, and I was following them up, and I was interviewing them about the conference that they had been in, because I want to become a speaker about networking, because that's what I love to do, right? Like what I love to do is make friends.
Yeah.
And as I'm doing that, I got introduced to this guy called Brendan Kane, friend of a friend, totally random, right? This guy became famous by, number one, he is greatly, credited as the social media strategist of the stars, right? Digital content strategist of the stars.
Yes.
And two, when he got tired of saying that he only did it for celebrities, he bet a book deal on the fact that he could grow 1 million followers in 30 days. And he did it. And it became a best-selling book. So I get introduced to this guy, and, as I'm talking to him, and I'm trying to be a speaker, right? At this point, he's speaking around the world, and somebody introduces me, and he takes a half-hour call with me. As I tell my story, and I'm like, how can I be a speaker? He's like, I don't know, dude, I did something extraordinary. You got to do something extraordinary. I was like, yep, you're right. How can I help you? Right? I'm like, you're right, man. Is there anything I can help you with? And he's like, dude, are you kidding me? I'm crushing it. And I was like, well, what do you wish you were doing better, man? And he was like, well, to be honest, I'm super expensive, so I can't help a lot of people with my expertise, but I want to get my message out to the world more, right? Like, I want to help more people, and I'd love to create recurring revenue instead of like chasing down these like $30,000 clients that are celebrities, right? So I reverse engineered what I did at this e-commerce business that created this like Facebook group community, and I was like, listen, man, this is how to do it. And I can just tell you how to do it. You can go do it, or you can, hire me and I can like help you do it. It's like, oh yeah, that's what I want. I'll hire you. So he hires me. And at the time I was selling community, right? Like I was like, I can build these communities because I knew how to leverage this content. But being the guy that was like stewarding his community, I was the fly on the wall on the world's best content strategies. So like I started understanding content, and he didn't need content because he has a whole team. But what I started realizing is that this community thing that I had created is a way to create massive content, right? So 2019, I start with nothing, no idea. By July, I get Brandon as a client. I get another client. And by the end of the year, I'm not talking to like authors and influencers. I'm talking to bigger businesses. And that's when JWB comes in the fold. And JWB is a company that sells turnkey rental income properties, right? So like, you give them $28,000. They sell you a house that they built on land that they acquired, that they put a tenant in, that is cash flow positive on day one, and ends up giving you like a 24% return on interest as for the length of the property. And they give you a portfolio manager that will teach you what to do with that money so you can buy more houses, right? So they turn like buying rental income properties into buying a T-bill, right? Like they've made it real easy. It's amazing. So the co-founder at the time, I met him they also have this amazing corporate culture. So they had this like employee volleyball tournament, and I'm playing volleyball with him. And because my friend is my friend is their like big provider of insurance. And he's telling me, he's like, man, I know I need to be making content for my business. It's just taking me 20 hours a week to just like turn on a camera. What do I say? Like, when somebody does something interesting in the office, I'm like, stop, do it again. I hate it, and I'm like, dude, what I'm doing right now is actually a content engine, right? So I start talking to him about how, like, if you just reposition, this strategy, and he buys in. So the strategy is this, Jaco. If you can understand your clientele, right? And their clientele is people that want to build wealth by investing in properties in Jacksonville. If you can understand your clientele and what interests them, right? Like at the end of the day, your clients are asking themselves 3 questions. Is this interesting? Do I trust this guy? And is there a solution for me, right? So we decided, if you can take inventory of what's interesting to them, right? And decide that you're only one part of that equation. And then you can take inventory in your network, in your clientele, in your employees, people that are within an arm's length, and bring them interesting topics that will get them engaged. And as you are interviewing these people, you are driving relationships between you and the person that you're interviewing, you and the audience that's there, and the audience and the person that you're interviewing. And you take that content and you repurpose it across the board, and you make sure that, just like Gary Vee does, that the audience makes it into the content, it's gonna start getting more and more people to show up. You're giving the people that you're interviewing marketing materials about themselves. So you're gonna get better and better guests. Like, you're gonna have your pick of guests, and you're gonna start creating this community around your business while educating them nonstop about the value of what it is, right? So we
Hmm.
decided, if you're gonna make this decision, if you're gonna invest in Jacksonville property, you need to, one, understand real estate, right? Like, you got to understand what, a little bit about investing and like where
Yes.
this fits as an asset class. You got to believe that Jacksonville is not the worst city in the world, like that it's got a future, right?
Yeah.
You gotta trust these guys, right? And you gotta say, is it for me? Who else is doing this?
Yes.
So we started taking those four content pillars, and instead of a webinar, which is what they used to sell, we
Hmm.
started calling it the Not Your Average Investor Show, right? So weekly, we would have something from one of those pillars, right? And it's all like this ready, fire, aim strategy. But we started off talking to like big hitters in their network, like the ex-mayor of Jacksonville, and like big names, just to get people's attention first.
Yeah.
And as it's progressed, what we realize is each of their customers all has this like amazing story, right? So we just started talking to each of their clientele, not about JWB per se, but about what's your strategy for retirement? Like, what are you saving up for, man? Like, how'd you get here? And as we continue doing that and repurposing it, it's turned into this growing community where our first couple shows had 6 people showing up. Now we get 60 to 100 showing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll just give you these two microcosms. First quarter, they were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal before I showed up, right? So they had like a bunch of leads come in, SEO, and only about 6 people showing up on the show. By the fourth quarter, we had a fan appreciation show like 2 days before Christmas, right? Like, fan appreciation. It's a thing, right? And it turned into this like hour and a half long episode of like person after person coming on the show and talking for like 5 to 6 minutes about, man, this show has changed my life because it's educated me on this and this and this. It's made
Yeah.
me friends with this person, this person, and this person. And it convinced me that I have to invest with you guys. And we have an hour and a half of just like testimonial of people saying, thank you for this community. Thank you for being transparent. Thank you for showing up. And that's like the anecdotal evidence. The data evidence is they just had their biggest quarter they've ever had. A 15-year-old company that's been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal twice just had their biggest quarter and had their biggest pipeline going into next quarter that they've ever had.
Hmm.
So in a year, this strategy of becoming a stage where all you're doing is being the center point between educating, entertaining, inspiring, and making people friends around each other
Hmm.
has led to business. Right. And the ongoing joke of Greg walking around the office with a camera, at first that was like the internal
Yes.
talk in the company. It has now become one of the big culture drivers inside their company. Like, everybody that works at the company is like, yeah, the show, what's going on the show? Like it's the topic of conversation, man. Like it's just this flywheel effect that just keeps feeding itself and only has positive contributions to
Yes.
everybody that touches it, because the guest is getting free marketing and free promotion. The audience is getting educated. The business leader gets to create a key relationship, like a really deep key relationship,
Yeah. Yeah.
for an hour a week, and instead of taking 50 calls from 50 clients, he takes one call and he's spending an hour with 50 clients.
Yeah.
And we're getting nonstop feedback from the clientele based on their questions. So like from quarter one to quarter two, we completely redesigned their website, because they had this website that was like an old dude with gray hair and an old lady on a boat. And then all of a sudden we realized, wait a minute, our clients look like me and you, man. Like their
Like
clients look like
human.
they're like, yeah, they look like they're 40. So like, let's redesign the website to talk to the pain points. We stopped talking about houses and started talking about asset classes,
Yeah.
right? And so it's completely reframed the conversation from like, I'm buying a house, to like, I need to put this much of my portfolio in this kind of risk profile, and you guys have the best return with the most passive way of doing it long term. It's been
Yeah.
incredible, bro. It's been amazing.
Yeah. So from a technical standpoint, so when you are also going into these sessions, right?
Oh yeah.
You're moderating all the questions, and this is
Here's the
your
beauty.
role.
I'm the co-host, right? So like, I'm
Yeah.
like the face of their business development.
Okay.
So out of that, me myself, I haven't talked about me there, right? It's led to a whole bunch of attention, right? Like all of their clientele now loves me. And when I come out with my book, they're going to buy my book too, just because I'm serving my client type of thing,
Yeah.
right? Like they're all following me and downloading my personal podcast and all these things, right? So everybody wins. Yeah. So from a technical standpoint, yes,
Yeah.
I become like the guy that leads the conversation.
Hmm.
My client becomes the person that you can just contextualize and add value whenever he wants.
Hmm.
So all he has to do is show up, and the guest is the show, right? It's all
Yeah.
about the guest.
Yeah. But there was just when somebody would offer me something like this, I thought myself, do I really want to be the face of this one company, or do I want to be more flexible? Did you have thoughts like this, or was it for you clear? Hey, nice opportunity, I go for it.
Dude, yes, that's a very valid question. How do I scale this as the face of everybody's company? Right?
Mm.
I can't. Right. But for me, I'm not, I'm mission driven, right? Like I'm really
Yeah.
trying to prove that community creation is the future business development. So when I got this opportunity, number one, these guys are unbelievable people, right? Like this company is super, super legit. There are these four partners that are incredible guys. They win
Yeah.
best place to work in Jacksonville every year, right? So like attaching my brand to that, I'm in, right? Second, it became my laboratory to prove out this business concept.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
and they paid me for it, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like I'm not cheap, right? So it became my laboratory to prove out this concept. Everybody has one. And now the way that I scale this is this same concept, I can implement this in other companies. I don't have to be the face of it. All
Yeah.
I have to do is have a network of podcasters that would
Yeah.
love to get paid $2,000 a month to be the face of someone's company and to
Yeah.
be a podcaster on a side hustle. Right? So like now if I get two more real estate clients, I can go find a young person that like loves real estate that's doing a real estate podcast already for free and say, "Hey
Mhm.
buddy, how would you like to do this for a living?" So
Yes.
so that's how I scale it.
This sounds like a licensing model. You could license this strategy
Oh, yeah.
and earn revenue from licensing it to podcast hosts or to real
Yep.
estate agents. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I plan to be CrossFit, right? Like I I'm writing the book called The Relationship Flywheel. Last night I had a talk with my lawyer, trademarking the Relationship Flywheel, right? Like
Good.
this is a process that anybody could do,
Yeah.
but at some point you can copy it, but you can't call it the Relationship Flywheel unless you're a part of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
listen, man. It's my watershed moment. Like it is. I think this is how I'm going to change the world because it undeniably has proven that you can create massive growth in your business
Mhm.
by being the nicest guy in the room. Right? Like that's what I care
Yes.
about.
It's all, I mean, this is very the core of content, right? That we want to improve the lives of other people, in my opinion. So
Mentorship at scale, we called it, right?
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
that's cool. That's really cool.
Thanks, man.
When it comes to community, how would you define community? Or yeah, first of all, this question, and then second question would be, um, when you want to create your own tribe, your own community, what are steps to start? I mean, we are already so much high, and when people are starting out, they need some baby steps.
Yeah. I would focus on serving as many
Mhm.
people as you can around the topic that you care about,
Mhm.
right? Like, and what that looks like is exactly how I started with JWB. Who are you trying to serve? Like, what's the cause that you're passionate about, right? They were passionate about rental income properties. I'm passionate about building relationships. So
Mhm.
everything that I talk about in content is just like giving every piece of advice that I have on how to make people like you more, right? Um, and once you figure that out, right? Like once you, first of all, find your voice,
Mhm.
right? Like understand what you're speaking about, what you believe, define what it is. What are your core values, right? Like if
Yes.
you want to build a community, you need to build it around something. And the minimum viable thing that you can build it around is values,
Mhm.
right? So get really clear on that first. Um, once you're clear on that, right? Like, and I'm assuming that the person that's thinking I want to create a community is already clear on that. Figure out who you're trying to serve with those that have those values, what they care about, You know, like what else do they care about? What you have to
Yeah.
say is one thing that they care about. What else do they care about? And then once you can figure out what else they care about, try to give it to them. Right. So that's why to me, the stage is the crucial thing. Right. Because if you
Mhm.
can, if you can then be like, okay, so then my stage is going to be my Facebook group or my Facebook account. Right. And let's say I care about yo-yos and all I have is a Facebook account, nothing else. Anytime I go talk to somebody doing something sweet with a yo-yo, I'm going to turn on my camera. I'm going to be like, dude, show me that trick with a yo-yo. All right, man. Well, tell me about how you did it. Right. Like,
Yeah.
like what else is there to do, man? Right. So
Yeah.
like, just figure out how you can I, figure out how to serve the people with the keys to the doors that you want to open. Right. And to me, one of the easiest things you can do to serve people is to promote them, is to give
Mhm.
them marketing materials, is to introduce them to your friends. So it all starts there, man. But in my thesis of community, all communities have to have some kind of stage, right? Like look at the church. There's an altar,
Yes.
people gather around it. There's a ritual, right? Rituals and stages create communities.
Mhm.
So if you have a steady cadence of I show up every week at this time, we have this certain kind of language, right? Like the Not Your Average Investor show. I've purposely created a bunch of inside jokes that we hit all the time, right? Like the, the founder of the company is called Greg Cohen. And I'm always, every time I introduce him, I'm like, the man they call GC because he generates cash flow and his name's Greg Cohen. And then the next week I'll be like, they call him GC because he's got great concepts and his name is Greg Cohen. Or, like,
Okay. Every
like
week
just
something new.
stuff, man. There's a lady that watches the show every single episode, and she's from this like little town in Florida that people go to swim with manatees.
Yeah.
So every time she asks a question, I'm like, Marilyn Cotterman from, oh no, I go, Marilyn Cotterman from Homosassa, Florida. And Greg goes, home of the manatees. Like just create common language, create common rituals
Yeah.
around the stage where you are serving people stuff that interests them. I think
Mhm.
that is the key to community, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. That's really cool. So I mean, I'm convinced. So I believe in your strategy, and I know when people listen to this, they think, well, this Pablo, he's speaking and he is so energy driven. Also, Jakob, he's also energy driven, but I can't do this. I'm an introvert. I can't go to people. And what would you say to these kind of people who say, well, other people can do it, but I can't do this?
First of all, introverts are some of the most valuable people in the room, right? Like me as an extrovert, I am always missing shit, right? Because I'm so like I'm like always expending energy. So I find introverts to be some of the most observant people in the room.
Yeah.
And if you're not comfortable on stage speaking to a bunch of people, your blog can be your stage. Your email list can be your stage.
Mhm.
So use that superpower of observation to create a stream of observations that could help people.
Yeah.
And the way that you use it as a stage is some of the stuff you're writing about you, some of the stuff you're writing about somebody else. It's the same one-to-one strategy.
Mhm.
You just don't have to be in front of a camera, right? Like there's plenty of blog driven communities, man.
Yes.
So as an introvert, by the way, the other fallacy is that introverts don't like people. Introverts like people. They just don't like they just get drained when they're around a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. So I do believe that everybody that's like, I'm an introvert, but once I start talking in a conversation, I love it. Right.
Yeah.
So, if it doesn't mean that you got to be like hype man like I am, right? Like this does come very natural to me. But you can reach out to someone and be like, hey, I got this blog. You can shoot someone an email like, I got a blog. I want to write an article about you. Here's my questions. You can send it back and I'm going to promote it to my friends. Or, hey, can we hop on a call and I can talk to you one to one,
Mhm.
nobody around. And then from that conversation, I'm going to write an article about it, talking about you and linking to your stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
you don't have to be so front and center.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other piece is go find somebody like me that sees values in introverts and is able to do the energetic heavy lifting while you get to make the observations, right? Greg
Mhm.
Cohen is an introvert. So he's great at when I'm sitting there talking about a guest and blah, 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 he's like, oh, you know what I hear there? And he creates that context, right?
Mhm.
So, introverts can do it too, man. It works on any context.
Yeah. So just to make sure that I got it, when you're on the show, they're basically free people, so free parties or free. Okay, and you're just,
Yeah,
so to
well,
say in the middle.
most, yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
just like, have you ever been to a conference and there's a panel?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Okay.
Right.
Same
So
concept.
it could be that. Yeah. It's or like you watch like a the Daily Show or something like that,
Hmm.
or Late Night with Bill Maher. Like he's got it's him at a seat, and then there's three people on a panel, and he's just like, oh, what do you think about this? And then they go back and forth, and then he's like, well,
Hmm.
what about that? So you can do it that way. You can do it one to one, right? Like not every show has
Yes.
a guest. Sometimes it's just me and Greg talking because COVID broke out and everybody wants to know what is going on, you know?
Yes.
So stuff like that.
Yeah, COVID is a good topic. So, I mean, 2020 was a COVID year. How affected this your business? Did you change a couple of things? I mean, everybody's going online. Everybody is using Zoom. Everybody is in the digital world. How did this whole thing affect your business and your way of creating content or producing content?
It has completely unlocked everything,
Hmm.
right? Like we at first, when we started in January and we're like, well, we're gonna have people at the office, we're gonna produce this show. When COVID hit, we're like, well, we're just gonna do Zoom calls.
Yeah.
And now we don't have to fly in a guest. Now we can talk to somebody in San Francisco and it's no big deal, right?
Yeah.
So COVID, I believe that outside of the obvious tragedies of
Hmm.
people getting sick and dying, outside of the tragedies of people in the hospitality industry and people in the travel industry, in just about every other scenario, COVID has simply accelerated a bunch of trends that were coming down the pipe anyways, right? Like the fact that you don't have to live in New York to work at an investment bank because you can really do it virtually from anywhere,
Hmm.
that was already happening. Now it's obvious. The
Hmm.
fact that, you know, universities in the United States are way too expensive and they spend a bunch of stupid money on big buildings when really you can just learn online and not charge you $40,000 a year. That was already happening, but now it's obvious.
Hmm.
For us, the fact that you can create relationships with people via content, via Zoom calls, and maybe it's not 100% of the same um, propinquity is the word I'm thinking here. Like maybe it's not the same level of connection, but is
Hmm.
it 85% the same level of connection? And does that 85% allow you to do it 500 times more? And therefore it's worth it? Yeah,
Yeah.
man, it is. Right?
It is.
So I am fortunate that my business and I tell people that I've been working on this problem before COVID. I've been working on how do I scale human relationships for about 5 years now. And I came to the conclusion that content was the key early 2019.
Hmm.
People started actually asking that question when COVID hit, right? So when COVID hit, I started getting calls from like president of a bank that I'm friends with. He's like, hey man, all my guys, the way that they do business development is they go to the Chamber of Commerce, they go to charity functions, we host luncheons, and now they can't do that. Can you teach them how to
Yeah.
network online? I was like, I got better than that. You can be the Chamber of Commerce if you host your own Zoom call once a week,
Yeah.
you know? So it's greatly helped my business, man. Really, quite frankly, 2020 has been maybe the best year of my life, to be perfectly honest. So
Yeah.
up until now, I think 2021 is going to be better. I very much empathize with people that felt the pain of COVID. I think it's when the world is in an inflection point is when visionaries make money, man.
Hmm.
Like when people really establish the big things, right? Like Google came out of the last recession, the last downturn. Facebook came out of the last downturn, right? Like I really believe that I just happened to be in the perfect driving position for
Yeah.
this business model, which is the way that the world is going to function. And I'm on the verge of creating one of the great businesses of all time.
Yeah. That's great. So I think the mindset is very important. If you say, well, I hope COVID is soon over and do nothing else, then you have some struggle. And I'm speaking with many coaches, with many high performers, entrepreneurs, and they all, I mean, there's a shock moment, and then there's the reaction, but also the strategy how to implement the things into the digital world, and not only transform it but also scale it
Yeah.
So if you're starting out in 2020, it was maybe a little bit too late. So you had to start a little bit earlier. But I think I'm also an optimist like you. I think we're next to the bad things that of course are happening, we are going into a good direction when it comes to the digital world. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, man. Um, I think if people look around and they think, if most people today, whether or not they buy into content or not,
Mm.
if they really take inventory of how they are nurturing most of their relationships, how they're making friends, they're going to realize that in their personal life, online makes up a big chunk. Like,
Yes.
it makes up a
Yes.
pretty big chunk. And then if you look at your business, and then think about it. Do you think in 10 years that's going to be more or less? Right? Probably more.
I
If
think
you look at
more.
and then if you look at your business and you think about how much of a chunk of that you're driving relationships via digital mediums, it's not going to,
Yeah, yeah.
does it match your personal life? And do you think that do you think in 10 years it's going to become more like I and are you going to be in business in 10 years? You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that what it is this break, this like cognitive dissonance in culture. Our personal culture is very digital. Our
Yeah,
business culture is like, nah, that's for kids, right?
yeah.
So there's a big gray area right now. Like you say, it's too late, man. I mean, I don't think it's too late at all. like I think it's just starting, man. Like I just think the sooner you get on this thing, the better, right? Like,
Mm.
and the more, and the key is, what is the key to everything? It's don't don't try to be the star of the stage, be the stage yourself. Don't try to be a
Mhm.
king, be a kingmaker, right? Like the key is serving people. So if you take the attitude of service when you're growing relationships and when you're helping people out, you're going to do well. If you take the attitude of service when you're making content, you're going to do well,
Yeah,
right? So, and it's not
yeah,
too late to do that, man.
yeah. When it comes to implementing the relationship flywheel, I thought, is it something only for B2B? I mean, you're more in a B. Do you have also examples of B2C cases?
uh, JWB is B2C, for example. So
Ah,
listen, there's
yeah, yeah,
first of all, my life is a relationship flywheel, right? Like I'm doing it
yeah. You're living it.
I'm doing it P2P, person to
Mm.
person. You know, so, so anybody could do it, dude.
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna pay me to do it, you're gonna probably have deep pockets, right? Like I charge about $8,000 a month to do it all. So it's a business that probably makes somewhere between 12 to $150 million a year and has a high lifetime value of a client in order to pay me to do it. But anybody could do it, right?
Mhm.
Like all it takes is dedicating yourself to it. All it takes is thinking like it, because you don't have to, again, what we've done with JWB has happened in a very short amount of time,
Mhm.
but you can just implement whatever little piece you got. Like my relationship flywheel, I've been building for 3 years. And now that I've been able to like sell it as a service to somebody else, now I can fund it doing for myself all out. You know, can you hear my dogs barking in the
Yeah,
background?
yeah,
Now that I'm doing it as a service, a la Gary Vee, I can do it for myself, right? So like again, service mentality.
yeah,
If I can
yeah.
figure out how to do it for others, they pay for me to do it. I learn how to do it. I'm able to hire people to do it for others, and those people that I hire can do it for me,
Yeah.
right? But every little piece counts, man. Before I had the whole system going, when I'd be at a networking event and somebody'd say something interesting, I'd be like, "Oh, dude, hold on." I bust out my phone. I'm like, "Hey, you just said the term cyber hygiene. What is that all about?" And they would tell me, and then I'd post it on LinkedIn, be like, "Dude, I just met this awesome dude. I never heard this term. It's cool." Right? Like it's that simple, right? Like as long
Yeah.
as you're doing that over and over, that's it.
Really cool. Like it. I mean, when is your book coming out?
Oh man, I'm hoping in the next like 90 to 120 days. Like I'd like to have it out
Yeah.
by the end of Q1, beginning of Q2.
Okay, but definitely this year.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like I've already paid for my ghostwriter, right? Like so the structure of the book is my time in Miami when I first get there, getting involved with nonprofits and learning that the way that you build relationships is through value and learning that not everything is linear, right? Like if you're helping people out unlinearly, it'll come back to you. Then it's going to be the piece about my brother and learning about community being the biggest value, and how you can miss the great value that people have. Even the people you love the most, you miss
Mm-hmm.
it. The third piece is me iterating through all that, which is essentially all the tactics and tips of one-to-one networking, right? That I've developed. I have like 50 speaking points to networking. They're all going to be there in stories. Um, then the next piece is going to be my foray into content, which is how I scaled my community building for the e-commerce company and for that year that I went to these conferences. And then the last chapter is going to be the formula of the relationship flywheel, exactly how to implement it, go do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there. It's
That's
just
cool.
gotta get written.
Okay, then we have to make another episode about
In,
your book.
bro. In.
That's
Like,
cool.
listen, man. By the time I'm iterating so quickly through concepts and lessons learned right now, that by the time we have another episode, like it'll still be the relationship flywheel. It'll just be at another level.
Version 2,
Yeah,
2.0.
2.0. Exactly.
That's cool. So I mean, I could do this for hours. I really
Bro,
enjoy
we
it.
got, we got another hour coming up on my podcast, dude. I can't
Yeah,
wait.
yeah, that will
Yeah.
be fun.
Yeah.
So my last question is, who would you recommend for my podcast?
Oh man, as a content guy, what kind of conversation are you trying to have?
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, people who are like-minded and who are in the content area, I had, for example, LinkedIn experts, how they generate sales from their LinkedIn account with very good LinkedIn postings. I had PR experts who were former journalists and founded their own PR agency. I had Jason Pfeiffer, who's the chief editor of Entrepreneur Magazine. So people who are in the area of content marketing, earned media, paid media, and owned media. Maybe people who are very experts when it comes to running ads. This could be something that's a niche that I didn't have before.
So, have I introduced you to the Biz Bros already, Luis and Luis Camejo?
No,
They got
no.
this podcast called Content is Profit. They're awesome. Um,
Content is profit.
Content is profit, man. It's
Yeah,
it's those guys. So those guys, they work with me on that JWB thing. They're the geniuses of repurposing.
yeah.
And they're super funny, really cool guys from Venezuela. They're great. I'm going to introduce you to Eric Cabral and Josh Carey that started this event called PodMax, which I think you should attend next time. It's tomorrow, but they're like, you can attend as a host, and it's like a 1-day event where you just like, they give you 3 people to interview and you network with all these other podcasters. And the keynote speaker is like the CMO of VaynerMedia and whatever, right? Like, I'm going to introduce you to those guys.
Mhm.
They're great at content, man. I got a ton of people to introduce you to, man.
Yeah, would be great. Appreciate all the contacts.
Done.
That's cool. So is there something that you want to share? Something like last statement or something?
Yeah, man. I'd love for people to check out my podcast, right? The Chief
Mm-hmm.
Executive Connector podcast. It's basically the living document of my relationship flywheel, right? Like it's everybody that I meet and how I get to know them,
Yes.
and it's networking tips and how to grow relationships. And man, I had the most fascinating conversation yesterday. This guy, Brian Bashand, was the right hand of the cardinal of the Catholic Church in Boston
Mm-hmm.
when the child molestation scandal broke out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this story of so he was that. So he was like this like priest. When this thing broke out in Boston, they got a new cardinal. The cardinal asked for him to be his right hand man. So he becomes like the gatekeeper of one of the most powerful people in the world, right? Like he's been in rooms with like the 5 living American presidents, and it's like, hey, Mr. Clinton, I want to introduce you to my cardinal, like that type of stuff.
Okay.
Then he left the Catholic Church later on and went to New York and became this like top-notch executive in recruiting. And then he decided to start his own business, coaching people on transformation and how you like redefine yourself when you realize that you're not living the life that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also started. So he's just like the formation of a priest. Like he's like a psychologist, social worker, public speaker, community builder. Like his skill set is incredible, man.
Yeah.
And his stories of like talking to Bill Clinton in the car, you know, like it's awesome. So yeah, so I just get to talk to really interesting people, man. I just recently talked to the head of the behavioral analysis program for the FBI, this guy Robin Dreek,
Mhm.
who is basically a human lie detector test. Super interesting, right? It's like Jack Bauer. So yeah, man. So my podcast, Chief Executive Connector podcast, and my website, Connect with Pablo,
Yeah.
connectwithpablo.com.
Yeah,
That's it.
I will include the links into the show notes. Don't
Thanks,
worry,
buddy.
everything fine.
I
So
appreciate that. I'm
people
sorry. I'm a
can.
storyteller, man. I can't just
Oh,
answer.
that's
Yeah.
everything is fine.
Cool.
So really, thank you for your time, Pablo. And yeah, see you next time.
Thanks, man. Listen. I really appreciate you having me, man. As you know, I appreciate a stage, and I appreciate somebody sharing a stage, man. So thanks for sharing your stage.
No, really, really, thank you.